Hi, I'm Jim Hoberman, Senior Film Critic for the Village Voice and a member of the selection committee for this year's festival. And to my left is Todd Haynes. Todd, well, I think this is a terrific movie, but I cut to the chase, and perhaps I'm speaking for a number of people in asking you, how did you get Dylan's permission? How closely did you work with him on this, and what does he think of the movie?
I wish I knew what he thought of the movie. He hasn't seen it yet, as far as we know. We gave Jesse, his oldest son, a DVD a couple weeks ago when we had it ready. And Dylan didn't really want to come to any public, big public events and watch it in the quiet of his own, you know, movable tour bus or home. But the whole thing started and wouldn't have been possible without Dylan's blessing. And so it started, this occurred when I was actually traveling from New York, where I had lived for 15 years, to Portland, Oregon, where I was going to go to visit my sister and write my last script, my last film. And found myself at this time just suddenly in this furious desire to listen to Dylan music again. And I hadn't really been in that mode quite like that since high school. And it drew me ever deeper into his music, his life, his unreleased recordings, stuff I'd never really known before. And I found myself sort of getting this little itch to respond to it creatively, I guess, and possibly, you know, make a film. But I knew, because I'd had a very difficult history as a filmmaker with music rights at different stages of my career, from one of my first short films, Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story about Karen Carpenter, which still can't be publicly shown due to the fact that I used the music without permission as a young sort of guerrilla filmmaker.
Not to mention Barbie dolls.
And Barbie dolls. And then later with David Bowie's estate, with trying to get music for a film about the glam rock era, Velvet Goldmine, which he did not want to give us. And I knew with this film there was no way to do the film, as I ended up doing with Velvet Goldmine, without Dylan's actual music. But I called Christine Vachon, my producer, who's right there, and said, you know, almost guiltfully, sheepishly, I'm thinking of maybe doing a film about Dylan as this kind of cluster of different selves, you know, and felt that that was really the only way to get to the key, or if there is a key, get to something comprehensive and complex about who he really is. And she said, look, don't write it, don't do anything rash. Let's just see what happens. And we started by approaching Jesse. And we set up a little meeting. We'd never met him before. He was a filmmaker. He's an independent filmmaker. And when we were in LA in 2000, summer of 2000, we all met at his office. And Jeff Rosen, Dylan's manager, was on the phone. And I just described the concept, which both Jesse and Jeff found very interesting. But said, look, we might like it to bits, but there's no way of knowing what Bob would say. And he basically said no to any film version of his life up till this point. So they both said, write it out on a one-sheet page, very simple, you know, and they told me all these things to avoid, like voice of a generation, genius of our time, any major accolade would have to be excised from this thing. And just send it to them with some of my films, and they said, we'll see, no way to know. And that fall, we got a call from Jeff who said, talk to Bob. He said, yeah, you like this guy? Let's give him the rights. And that included music and life rights to make this film possible.
And I think that the Scorsese documentary was already in the works.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Why only 6?
Exactly. I'd always, in the concept, it was 7 different Dylans, And there was even a different character. The only difference from the proposal I gave him at the time was there was an additional character called Charlie who kind of got absorbed into the Woody story. Then I always sort of thought, I liked Seven. It came up in a lot of Dylan lyrics. It had a kind of 7 stages of man logic to it. The Christian Bale's character really sort of functions as 2 different halves of a coin, even if it's literally the same character in the film. But yeah, I just had to stop somewhere, I guess.
What was it like working in CinemaScope for the first time in your career?
It was exciting. It was so exciting, and it really felt like this film, for the first of any of mine, I think, really called for a more panoramic format. And it just lent itself to it has a kind of epic American poem about it in feel and in breadth, and I just felt it was appropriate. Of course, when we blew up for the first time our 16mm source material, the stuff we actually shot in 16, like the Ben Whishaw stuff in 16 black and white, and all of Christian Bale's story is shot in Super 8 16. But especially in Ben's, that grain on the anamorphic perspective gets even more, exaggerated, but it was beautiful. And it accentuated the different stocks that we did use in the film.
Did Dylan approve the last word? Is it Knocking on Heaven's Door?
Yeah.
Did he approve that?
He didn't have that kind of close relationship to the film in terms of approving details or creative choices. He really, in a way, what was extraordinary about the terms of the deal was I almost felt like I was being afforded the same kind of creative space that it's Jeff Rosen's job to secure around Dylan so he can continue to do his creative work, which is just an unusual situation to be in when I'm actually making a film about his single client. And he's, I'm not Jeff's client, and Jeff's there to protect Dylan and make sure. But he gave me a huge amount of creative space that Dylan obviously approved and didn't really need to hear anything more about after those terms were basically expressed.
And the other question had to do with time travel as a director.
In cinema, from a director's point of view.
Time travel from a director's point of view.
That's an interesting term and one that I couldn't help but think about, or came to mind when I was looking at Dylan's life, and particularly things he said, and that quote that comes at the end of the film, it's like yesterday, today, and tomorrow all in the same room, and there's no telling what can happen. That came out of this period where he was studying with this unique painter in the mid-70s, I think in New York. And this, I'm drawing a blank on his name. I bet there are people in this room who know him or know who I'm talking about. Dylan was getting more into his painting. This was after, this was before he did Planet Waves and Blood on the Tracks. And the painter who didn't know Dylan, or if he did, didn't care, and kind of treated all of his pupils with a kind of harsh equality that Dylan responded to well and appreciated being treated like anybody else. But the theory, I think, that the teacher was putting out there was that on a canvas, all of these separate realities can coexist, not only narrative and representational, but simply the quality of paint and matter can all coexist with representation. And yet, standing back from the painting, one might find a different cohesion or a different meaning or reading of that work than you find when you examine pieces of it. It inspired Dylan, I think, to take more liberty with playing around with temporal representation and meaning in his lyrics, but also to literally put together different stories in single songs. In the song "Blood on the Tangled Up in Blue," for instance, it seems to be talking about a woman that he once knew that he's rediscovered, and memories from the past come back. But suddenly, it'll be talking about a revolution in the air and that house on Montague Street, and he started into dealing with slaves, and basically that's all seemed to be quotes from the life of Rimbaud and Verlaine. Later, in another song on the record, Rimbaud and Verlaine are quoted directly. So he's literally playing around with narrative subjects and putting different stories into a single lyric in a very ornate way, but one that you still feel you can sort of comprehend at a visceral level. This idea of mixing up temporal experience and, you know, in many ways seems to be what a lot of great artists and people in the sciences and people in philosophical work all kind of end up kind of veering toward, you know, in different ways and in different disciplines. That relativity of temporal experience is something I think you can find in Dylan's music.